In this video, we'll talk about how to create linear equations in slope-intercept form. So let's review what slope-intercept form means. So slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. And the slope is another term for rate of change. That is your change in y over your change in x, and that is represented in this equation by m. M is your rate of change. And the intercept, technically we're talking about a y-intercept, which is what happens, or whatever the y value is when x is 0. It's where the function crosses the y-axis. It's also sometimes called an initial value. And that's represented in this equation by b. So, the whole idea here is that we just have to find two numbers. We find the rate of change, and then we find the initial value, or the y-intercept. Whatever verbiage you want to put on it, that's the goal. We find those two things, we can make the equation. So let's dive right into an example. So we have a line that passes through the points 4, 9, and 3, or negative 3, negative 19. And we want to know what's the equation for that line. And the idea is, like I mentioned before, we just have to fill in these two blanks. That's it. So what we can do, since we don't have a graph to look at, we have to figure out the rate of change. Now remember, rate of change is equal to your change in y over your change in x. And remember, there's a few ways you can find it. You can take the difference in your y coordinates and divide it by the difference in your x coordinates. You could plot the points and then use it visually. So do something like so. Find your change in x over your change in y. Or there's a method I like. If I'm going from 4, 9 to negative 3, negative 19, what I can do is I can say, okay, my change in x would be whatever I have to add or subtract to 4 to make negative 3, which means I would subtract 7 in this case. That's my change in x. Alright, and how do I get from 9 to negative 19? I would have to subtract 28. And this is my change in y. Which means that m is going to equal negative 28 divided by negative 7, which is a positive 4. I'm halfway there. So at this point, I know my equation looks like y equals 4x plus b. And now we have to figure out what the b is. Now, we don't have a graph to look at, so we can't necessarily figure out the initial value, and we don't necessarily have a t-chart we can look at that has the initial value listed for us. However, if we look back at our original problem, we're given 2 points. We know that when I plug in this x value of 4, my y value is 9. And likewise for the negative 3 and the negative 19. We can choose one of these 2 points to plug in and solve for b. I'll show you what I mean here. I'm going to pick the point 4, 9. So let's scroll back down. And I'm going to plug in 4 for x and 9 for y. So 9 is going to equal 4 times 4 plus b. Now this is an equation that we can work with. We only have one variable, b, so we can deduce here. So let's simplify a little bit. 9 is going to equal 16 plus b. I can then subtract 16 from both sides, which means b is going to equal negative 7. And I've got the other half of my equation, or the other piece at least. So y is going to equal 4x minus 7. Or you could write it as plus a negative 7. But that is my equation. And the whole idea is I found my m and I found my b, which are the slope and the y-intercept respectively. So that's one example. It's a little more involved than some others you might see. Some others you may be given the slope already, or you may already know the y-intercept so you can deduce what the other one is. But this process will work regardless of what situation you're in.